Thank you very much. First of all, I am really honored to be here and speak to this group, and also be in India, where I have not had the depth of experience I've had elsewhere in the world in some of my business travels and business activities. And listening to Frank Partnoy's presentation and having the honor to speak to him over the last couple of days, I see the very articulate project that he speaks to and describes, and with Uni's invitation, and how the objective, the mission, and the feelings that I have developed over previous 35 years with 31 years at Eastman Kodak, it does fit together, and I'm hoping that some of the insights I provide will in fact cause that to be useful to this group, and as all of you position yourself for the future in your own business endeavors. I have a presentation that I call Leadership, Management, and Value Creation. And I speak to it through the points of view of invention, perseverance, and branding. I will speak to an analogy. In the U.S., sometimes we talk about a glass of water that has water up to the midpoint, and an optimist will look at that and say, is that half full or half empty? And when you look at it in the business world, depending on whether you're a leader, whether you are optimistic, pessimistic, or know what you can do, someone will say, oh, that's half full, and I know how to fill it up. I know what it takes to get it to that point. Unfortunately, the things I'm going to be talking about, there were too many leaders and too many people appointed in a position of leadership who says, oh, that's half empty. I got to do something before it's really empty, because I have to protect myself. And that becomes, I think, a fundamental challenge that we face in the decisions we all make in our daily lives, and for those of us who are appointed to very senior positions in companies for the very health and existence of a company. I'm going to be talking about Eastman Kodak Company, but I view it as a microcosm of perspectives and opinions that you see in the quotes there on my statement. Over my career, I helped do it right, but the parts I'm not proud of is I also helped do it wrong. There were things I look back on and I say, oh my goodness, why did we do that? And in that process of helping do it wrong, at the level I was at, I had senior executives on top of me, but I had thousands of people who looked up at us and said, what are you doing with our company? So I'm going to be speaking to that a little bit, and then try to use that microcosm as a reflection on what is happening in our companies throughout the world, not just the U.S., but our companies throughout the world, where we deal with individual decision making and deal with what I view as a form of leadership. There's three questions that I would, Frank talked about questions. How does a company achieve 120 years of acclaimed success and then over 10 years fail by all measures and end up in bankruptcy? In January of 2012, Eastman Kodak Company filed bankrupt. It was a $25 billion company in revenue, $30 billion of value of market cap. It had a top 10 global brand, thousands of patents, not patents, thousands of patents. It had envied trade secrets. The number of engineers who wanted to go snoop around Kodak to learn their trade secrets, it was unbelievable. It had a manufacturing capability that rivaled the process capabilities of the world. And it had 90,000 employees. Now there are about 4,000 or 5,000 left that wonder if they'll get a paycheck. The second question, what are the most appropriate control processes, financial incentives for the top executives when appointed to a position, and I use the word ultimate decision-making authority. They are the ultimate decision makers in this process. The board of director oversight, is it independent or is it conflicted? You can look at boards of directors in various capitalistic forms and say, are they truly independent and are they looking out for the right objectives? Frank spoke a lot about the oversight of the analysts, the fund managers, the investment bankers, the whole financial community that puts pressure on performance of a company. And is that pressure on the performance of a company structured in a way that is helpful, useful to true value creation? I spent a lot of time with the SEC and public accounting, and I was a finance guy. I had an MBA in finance, started out with Kodak in the finance, and a lot of time spent with public accounting and those looking at us. And I got trained to know how to answer questions in order to get them to walk out the door. What is the impact? The third question is, what's the impact of cultural expectations on the decision-making process? Short-term gratification and greed, notice that word greed, versus what I call fortitude, belief in a strategy, and a vision that communicates with passion and determination in order to execute that strategy. That's consistency, day in, day out, and know where you're going. Is that roadmap where you want to be, and are you on the stepping stones to make that roadmap real? Where do I come from, and why am I standing in front of you today thinking I know what I'm talking about? 31 years with Kodak, as I mentioned, and in my introduction I started out as a financial analyst, worked with some brilliant financial analysts, and I go, wow, these people are smart. But as I moved up the ladder and had I'll call it a blessed career. I was in the right place at the right time, and I worked with a lot of very smart people, and they appreciated how hard I worked for them. But I had 20 assignments over 40 countries. Over those 40 countries and those 20 assignments, I had points of contact with thousands of employees, regulators, executives, and stakeholders. I spent a lot of time with a variety of cultures in that process. I am a very poor joke teller also. My sense of humor is poor. Because I recognize that, I give my punchline up front. I don't wait. I give it now. And here's my punchline and my conclusions, and then I fill in the blanks afterwards of why. Here's my conclusions of my presentation. Inventors and entrepreneurs, and I know a few. I'm blessed to work with a few of them now after my Kodak career. They have a vision that lasts a lifetime. It's not a vision that says, oh, gee, they look out and they say, am I doing what takes me to where I'm going to, really know where I can go with what I have. I have another category called leaders, and from my experience, and prior to my corporate world, I had a brief experience in the U.S. Navy as a military officer, and I met some very, very strong leaders in that environment. But usually, what I see in most leaders, there's a vision that's horizon of 2 to 10 years. And you know what? It's dependent on the mission. Depending on what that leader has to deal with, that it's very mission driven, and they can rally the people around them to deal with that. But without that connection or correlation to a mission, it's very hard for leaders, even very, very good leaders, to expand beyond that. So if the vision is not there with that leadership skill, you end up sometimes getting frustration and confusion. Now I go to the term called managers. The U.S. has very, very highly rated MBA programs, and you have a master's in business administration, and they teach management. How do you manage? How do you manage? How do you manage? I see managers as having a horizon of 0 to 3 years at best. Why? It's a function of the measuring sticks. It's a function of the incentives and the cultural bias that we're all dealing with. I've heard quotes, and I repeat this quote frequently, that says when an individual refers to his boss or the higher levels, you say, you know what, I'll pay attention to what you tell me, but I'm going to work on whatever you measure. That becomes the reality of life. When someone gets up in the morning, they look in the mirror and they go to work, they work on how they get measured. And that happens over and over and over. Another point I'm making, it's very difficult to see people move across these categories. You rarely see a manager becoming a true visionary. The gene theory of why they got trained, how they got trained, to now become a visionary, it's very difficult. Does it happen? Sure, it happens. but the kind of core competent type basis is there. But the impact of decisions made by the top players in each group, they have premier significance on companies, people's lives, nations, and societies in total. When you look at the society of the United States of America, driven by the financial crises that we are dealing with today, dealing with the deindustrialization of what's happening in the world of manufacturing and inventiveness, it is changing our society, it is changing the culture, and it is changing the nation. I'm going to back up again and spend a little bit more time on George Eastman as part of this microcosm I'm talking about, and why it is a microcosm of global industrialization. I joined the company in 1975, and it is interesting, the cultural visions and strength of what George Eastman brought to the company that he invented or created, built, carried on for many, many generations. I joined the company as a young professional with an MBA, and I was going to be a financial analyst. I show up for work. What do they do? Monday, you report to photography class. I go, what? Yeah, you're going to a one-week class on how to be a photographer. I go, hey, I got this MBA finance. You know, I know how to run spreadsheets. I can do this. I could. No. The answer that was given to me is, you are a professional in Eastman Kodak's organizational structure. When you travel, wherever you travel, and someone says, you work for Kodak, the first thing they ask you is, hey, I got these pictures. I'd like you to look at these. What did I do wrong here? And they expect an answer. And that was the pride that individuals like myself were instilled in the company. So there's a cultural dynamics that kind of came with that. But anyways, George Eastman, he started a company in 1880, dry plate manufacturing. Okay, you could say, gee, dry plate manufacturing, pretty mundane type process or whatever. But he had a vision. He says, I don't make plates, I provide photography. Now, what's that umbrella that he provides in photography? He had a goal. I'm going to make the camera as easy to use as a pencil. And that was his objective, to make that. Now, how am I going to do that? You know, I listed the step processes because as I've done research on the entrepreneur and the founder of the company I spent so many years at, first of all, he invented flexible film. He said, okay, I can put emulsions down, and you know what? I'm going to create those identical. They're not going to be, they're going to be identical. Batch after batch after batch after batch. And you know what? I'm going to be the lowest cost, because what's going to happen by being the lowest cost of whatever is out there that competes with something that creates an imaging picture, I know I will win. And he had a passion for that. Step two, I got to let everybody know what I'm doing. That's where he implemented advertising and branding right from the very beginning. He had a way to make that happen. Step three, make it easy to get pictures, not just the process for pictures, but make pictures important to people. When you hear stories of a home burning and people running out to save their lives, they grab their picture albums, their memories. I mean, that was the kind of thing that, you know, Eastman knew he had a vision that he could turn that into that. Step four, customer service was the highest priority. There's a story that is told about him in 1905. This was about 20 years after he formed the company. They had a huge quality problem. Gelatin that was used in the manufacture of film uses raw bone to make gelatin. There was a problem where he didn't know this, what the problem was or what the depth of it was, but the cattle that were feeding on the pastures were picking up certain chemicals that turned into their bone, which fogged film. And he was advertising that this film would last a year. You could put it in your desk drawer for a year and use it. It turned out it was good for 2 or 3 months. He called back every roll of film in the world that was out there, almost bankrupt the company in the process, and replaced it and went to Argentina, where the cattle eat the most pure grass in the world. and created a gelatin plant in Argentina to get the bone marrow and a bone to make the gelatins you need. So the point is, you not only have a vision, but you got to live the vision. You got to know what it takes to make it happen. Step 5, treat employees as partners in a team with respect, communication, appreciation, and reward. His process during the crash of 1929, even though the business was less than half of what it was, not a single employee was laid off in a company. He sold all his personal assets to make that happen. Step 6, obstacles are not a reason for failure, but challenges make the success even more satisfying. Eastman knew he needed a director of research, and he met an individual named Dr. Ed Mees in London, in a suburb north of London, at a conference he went to and so on and so forth. He said, "You got to come work for me. I need you to be my director of research." He goes, No, I'm not going to do that. He said, I like the company here. I'm doing a good job here. We'll talk, but Eastman goes back to Rochester, New York, and a couple weeks later sends a telegram to Dr. Mees. He says, "You start work for me on Monday. I bought the company you worked for." He had a view that he knew what he needed in order to make things happen. Again, it's not just a vision, it's how you make a vision happen. This was his advertising campaign of 1896. The Kodak camera, you press the button, we do the rest. And what he did is preloaded the film that he made in these cameras and got them out to people, so you press the button, he will get you pictures. And this became the, if you will, the theme of the entire company. Branding, it evolved, but there was a common theme with the Kodak yellow that was built up through the branding of the company, and it became global. The name Kodak was created through a linguist. Eastman hired a linguist and said, what word in the world can be pronounced in every language, in every style of speech that we have, and be redundant enough that everybody knows what you're talking about? And that's where Kodak came from, the word Kodak. I have a series of pictures that I pulled out of various places here. Here's Eastman accepting the Academy Award with the process there. He was very, very good friends with very senior inventors around the world. Here's a picture of him with Thomas Edison. Thomas Edison was instrumental in making movie pictures happen. And as I said, Eastman now has 11 Academy Awards, Eastman Film and preventions of that. Down at the bottom is, for those of you who can't see it, is an x-ray of a hand. When Roentgen invented x-rays, Eastman said, okay, I'll make the film that goes on it. And the first x-ray was of the hand of the inventor of x-ray. When it came to the information world, we talked about the information age starting in the 80s and 90s. 1980s, 1990s. This was back in the 20s and 30s when he created Record Act Film to record information in a way that was useful. Fast forward, you don't build a company over 120 years at 6% of sales going into R&D over and over and over and over. And these are images of the various technologies that were out there. From science driven through space, lunar activities, Mars activities, and there's a bottom right there's a picture of a copier. Kodak invented very much the very, very fine particles that go into copiers, and boy, Canon and everybody else loved it because they were able to leverage that tremendously, even though we were not as successful in leveraging it as a company. Frank spoke about the books he has written, and when I purchased his books and started going through them, I go, wow. I'm in a process of trying to write a book myself. Maybe, 10% of the way there. But it's called You Press the Button, the deindustrialization through the lens of a failed blue chip. And what I'm doing is creating what I'm speaking to now is a microcosm of why things go wrong the way they go. And it's really a book on leadership and a book on what it takes to have a vision and follow through on it. Time forces evolution. This evolution is true for companies, countries, economies, and societies. Face it, we all change. The human culture changes, the nature changes. But let's focus first of all on companies. Companies change, and the most critical thing that's there are the succession plans that go with it. Those who take the top job set the direction. And that if you don't have a succession plan on companies, your evolution that is reality will be warped at best. Countries change, as we all know, through people, politics, wars. Stability and predictability versus uncertainty and risk. We are in the world of business, right? You have to deal with that element of evolution. And I'll talk more about globalization, but it is a reality. Economies change through currency, wealth, and as I said, globalization, and economies change through the kinds of things that Frank spoke to. You know, financial failures that are driven by the wrong decision processes and so on. And societies change. As I lived in a variety of societies, most of my in-depth knowledge is in Tokyo, Japan. I spent many, many years there. But I also spent a lot of time in South America and a lot of time in Western Europe. But when you look at societies with values, ethics, and controls, all of these have a play on how the society evolves. We are in business. If we don't recognize that, if we don't embrace that, and we are going to fail in our businesses in that process. The evolution of Kodak, this is the reality. It was managed in denial. I use the word management in denial. What went wrong and why? 100 years of internal grooming. It worked well for sales, R&D, operations management, product design. I showed you some of the products. That wasn't the problem. But it did not prepare the leadership for what happened in the dynamics of those looking at a company through the eyes of Wall Street. The mutual fund managers, pension managers, analysts, they all looked at a Kodak and said, you know, what are you doing next year? Show me your numbers. Show me your results. I was very busy in parts of my career writing all that stuff down. And oh my gosh, you talk about the pressure cooker environment independent of what the company really stood for. Then we made a major, major problem. We did a diversification play in a company in 1988 that was stupid. And it caused a turnover at the top. That was the causing fact. The reality, the first CEO came in to head the company up. His name was George Fisher. He was CEO of Motorola, and he came on as CEO and chairman of Kodak. And as I said, in over 100 years, that was the first time an external CEO took over the company. It was a sea change overnight. The first thing he did is replace the next layer down. I had worked for 3 CFOs up to that point in time. Fisher comes in, a new CFO came in a matter of 4 weeks. He brought us around a table and he says, I'm going to see if you guys are worth a damn. And set a stage that was very, very different in terms of a profile. The revolving door. When you create a revolving door of a company at the top and 1 or 2 layers down, now how do headhunters bring people in? Compensation packages. Leverage up the options. Create the short-term financial incentives that bring them in the door. What does that cause? The same kind of decision processes that occur. The executive that came in created a mindset of expectations of these kinds of bonuses. When it came to earnings and cash, Eastman Kodak on film enjoyed, I'll say the number, 70 to 75% gross profit margin on film. It cost us about 25 cents to make a roll of film we sold for $3. Now, it took $10 billion of equipment to be put in place to make that film, but yet when you look at GP and you look at earnings that come out of that machine that runs 24/7, and the earnings that came out of that, There was very few product lines that could ever replace that next year, 18 months, 2 years out. The future of Kodak and compensation was tied to film. Anybody worth their salt at the top of the company had to keep film in Walmart, Kmart, Target, and everywhere else in the world where retail establishments sell film. If they didn't, next year's bonus is not going to be there. So, what do you do with the world of digital? Try to hide it under the table. Try to keep it from ever seeing the light of day as it relates to the next round of product. Why did it not have to be? My perspective on this, through 1995, 70% of all digital imaging patents were invented and owned by Kodak. 70% of anything we know in the world of digital imaging was invented by Kodak. 30 years of R&D created thousands and thousands of exclusive patents. They were paid, a lot of those were paid for by the tax dollars in the United States. Why? The imaging sensors that were used by the U.S. military during the Cold War. From space, we could take a picture of somebody walking across the crosswalks in Moscow. That was the science behind imaging that Kodak could do. But the leveraging of that into the commercial world became problematic because of this profit motive we talked about. However, digital cameras, sensors, file formats, all the JPEG files, everything that you work with, they were all invented by Kodak. Color correction algorithms. When you take color and you look at deviations in color, one of our research laboratory scientists invented a blood analyzer that is used today after it was sold to another company that take blood and through a spin cycle creates differentiation on color of various blood content and instantaneous recording based on color deviation, color algorithms. But my point is, the knowledge was there, the insights were there. Equipment manufacturing techniques for us were not good. We could make processes. We could make film 7 feet wide at 1,200 feet per minute at 1/2 of 1% waste. But we could not manufacture a camera that could keep up with Canon, keep up with the world of equipment manufacture. Why? We didn't have to. Film was so profitable. I don't know if you ever heard the term Gillette model. That's where you give away the razors in order to sell razor blades. Kodak had the camera model. We'd make cameras no matter what it cost us and get them in the market so it burned film. And that behavior did not prepare us for the digital space because there was no consumable. The point is, you need to have a vision that is carried over by the current management to say, where are we going with this, with this company? Bottom line, a planning horizon of 5 to 10 years at minimum was required in order to make this transition. The reality is we had a 1 to 2 year planning horizon. Frank spoke about a 7% discount rate. I started in 1975. Ours was 15%. A 15% discount rate, if you didn't deliver the goods, you didn't have a project. Now tell me how you do a major transition of something you've invented and put it into the marketplace. It wasn't possible. It would have required vision, courage, leadership, and unselfish respect for the stockholders to trade 70% profit margins on film for a 40% profit margin for something that'll be probably 4 or 5 times bigger than what film would be. Because, I mean, think of the imaging that's going on today in the world of digital. I don't care what device you're using, it's there. The Kodak brand, I submit, and remember, these are my statements, I submit could have carried this transition. Kodak was pictures to the entire world, and it could have made it happen. This is in 1992. I was outside the executive conference rooms on the 19th floor of our corporate offices waiting for a presentation I was giving. And the presentation kind of fell on flat ears. I was in one of my sour moods. And while I was waiting out there, I got talking to a few people and they were snapping pictures. Well, they got one of me smiling, and the executive vice president of the company in 1992 routed this around the company. and put the little balloon there with the speech to it, where I said, "Hey Jack, bad news, the company is bankrupt." This was 21 years ahead of reality, but they used humor to discount, if you will, any cautions, concerns, or views that would eliminate the reality of life that we're facing. The ultimate, if you will, I won't call it an insult, but the ultimate dynamic is you have comic strips around here. I'm not sure if you have this one, but we have a common comic strip called Pickles. And this is a grandma, grandpa, and they have the grandkids running around. The grandma says, "How, look, Grandpa, he fell asleep, and he's got his magazine upside down." And she says, "Yeah, that's a Kodak moment if I ever saw one." He goes, "Yeah, that sure is a Kodak moment." He goes, "What's a Kodak?" So this was in a national press. So it's one of those things where you say, okay, I guess reality is reality. Kodak's story repeats itself. And I'm not going to go through all these lists in the interest of time, but it does repeat itself across different industries, countries, and different management. There's issues around entrepreneur and vision. I already spoke to that. The planning horizon beyond a single generation. Succession planning. If you don't have succession planning that shares the same values and the same insight, you'll get what you deserve. I spoke a little bit about globalization. Tomorrow, the world is smaller than it was yesterday. Fact of life. If you're going to be successful in business, you need succession plans that deal with that. The world of greed and managerial ethics. We don't have a corner of that in the U.S. market, although we share in the breadth of that. As I've traveled the world, there's a lot of challenge out there in the world of greed and the world of ethics. And money gets skimmed in various ways, not to mention points of decision processes. I already spoke to the fact that the world is smaller, rapid technology. George Eastman was ahead of his time with global objectives. I spoke to little comments about Argentina and his research director and so on, but that's just a nit compared to where the future has to be with new business leaders. Another comic strip, and this is generic, not just Kodak. I don't know if you have Dilbert in this environment. Dilbert is the ultimate sarcasm on bad business management that creates some form of sense of humor. Here he says, the only hope for survival of our company is to innovate in ways that cannibalize our current products. The downside is you'll lose your fortune in CEO compensation when your revenue dips in the short run. The feedback is, thanks, I'll stop by your hovel later with some ideas of ruining your life also. So here is the reality of life as you're dealing with the kinds of decisions that we're all faced with. You will be faced with the same kinds of challenges in the environment here. The last slide I have is my personal impressions of the experiences I've had around the world and what that means relative to the cultural impact on global business, and why when you make a reflection on the kinds of succession plans you're putting in place, the kinds of products, the marketing campaigns behind those products, the branding, the entire structure you put in place, you need to be sensitive to these kinds of, and if someone doesn't agree with this, if there's a leader of a company who looks at this and says, "Oh, that's baloney, it's not that," great. Prove it wrong, but make sure you consider what the dynamics are as you're making your bet on the future of your company. The point I make about the USA, looking forward, we are inventive for convenience. We were a society that invented a lot of things with a view of dynamics and so on. As I look around in our country, in my country today, a lot of the inventions are tied to how do I make things more convenient? How do I make simplicity simpler? How do I make life easier? And those kinds of things become the focus. I see hard work, but hard work for leisure, not hard work for the sake of hard work. I see a pride, but it's a pride for the future if they in fact can focus and rally. The term ignorance driven by means. As I've traveled the world, if there's one thing I could say is that a very large share of other countries around the world have the top leaders of that country, not even the top leaders, I'll say the top 20% of that country in both education and what have you, that are truly global in their thought. There's an awareness of what's happening in other countries. There's an awareness of what's happening in my own country. I used to travel to Western Europe, and I would get oh, so-and-so got elected in the U.S., and they're happening here, and I'm looking at them, and I couldn't answer their question, and I was embarrassed. So there's an awareness. In the United States, I submit maybe the top 5%, but beyond that top 5%, there's an ignorance of the world dynamics that are really happening. If they didn't read it in yesterday's USA Today, the ignorance is out there. So when it has to become catastrophic before it becomes dynamic. But there's an ignorance driven by means. I say by means, why? Because they can afford to. They could be insular in their thoughts. There's responsibility driven by the heart. Nobody wants, don't ever go around and try to force somebody to contribute something, but there is a contributory heart to help where they can. As I said, incentives are driven by greed, but individualism is driven by heritage. And I use the word individualism. We're all crazy Americans. You know, we all want it our way, and that's how we tend to as you will see in the papers in the next 6 months over what happens with our dynamics around the Second Amendment and the right to bear arms. There is a individualism driven by that heritage. I won't go through the details with others that I said, except I would like to touch on India. I put in parenthetically there my novice opinion, because I have not spent much time here. I've done some research and some reading, but my novice opinion is as follows. I think it's multicultural, but somewhat homogeneous in its views. I think education is the key to achievement, and I think the individuals I've come in contact with, and both in the U.S. as well as the dynamics there's a deep appreciation for education and how education creates the key to achievement in that process. I see stress from stratification. Stress driven hurting business success or potentially hurting business success, but also the ability for openness and degrees of ability. But there's a huge global awareness for the opportunities that it could present itself. And the closing message I would make to all of you, what I've seen in the few days I've been here and what I've researched in the past, these opportunities are immense. And what I see in the strength of India and the strength of the population, there's huge leverageability in this globalization opportunity out there to create tremendous success, not only for your society, your culture, but especially for the businesses that are operating within this environment. With that, I'll close, and if there's any immediate questions, I'll take those.